Greetings, hello, welcome back to Covert Infiltration and a look back at the campaign that we recently ended and my thoughts on the campaign itself, on the individual mods and systems that made up the campaign, and yeah, just general kind of wrap-up summary as we're moving on to new campaigns. Before we start off, I need to throw in a few disclaimers. First of all, and most important, what I already said in the final episode of the campaign itself, I want to just give a big thank you to the production team from Christopher Ott's Discord server that put together the mod list, that curated all the things, that made some adjustments to the mod. It's a shame about the whole Season 8, Season 9 thing that I kind of got stuck on Season 8 while they're still constantly working on Season 9 balancing and updates, etc. So everybody who just, sacrifices their own free time for others to have a good game experience deserves utmost respect. And so nothing I want to say here is in any way intended as an attack or shifting of blame or anything like that to this effect. So it's really a heartfelt thank you for taking your time putting this stuff together and just being open also to feedback and yeah, just being there to give other people a good time, because that's the whole goal of modding, right? To extend the lifespan of a game and let other people have fun with that game. And for the most part, that's also the success of this. So that's disclaimer number 1. Disclaimer number 2. We finished this campaign, which when you watch my content either on YouTube or on Twitch is an indication that I enjoyed it. If I don't enjoy something, I'm not going to finish a campaign. There's several campaigns, especially on Twitch, where I halfway through said, okay, look, this is not it. I'm stopping it. There are whole game series that ended after episode 7 or so because I said, no, that game's not for me. So, and in no moment do I want to give the impression that I hated playing this. The opposite, like, at some stages of this campaign, I was like 10, 12, maybe 15 episodes ahead of the YouTube release schedule because I was very much hooked on it and couldn't stop playing it. So that's usually a good indication for me personally, where I say, hey, yeah, this is fun. That being said, these sections were more in the beginning of the campaign, and as the campaign went on, a little bit, or later on, a lot of frustration came on top of it, which kind of made me not necessarily always excited to play the next mission. Let's just put it this way. That's number 2. Number 3. One thing I definitely realized when thinking about this campaign and thinking about my opinion on this is that I have to admit that I am incredibly spoiled, and spoiled by, for the most part, over the last years, when it comes to XCOM, playing Long War 2, Long War of the Chosen, and its related mod collections and mod setups. And the thing about those mods is that it is a complete package. Every aspect of the game, strategy, tactical, classes, enemies, is balanced against each other. For a collection of individual mods that are kind of all created, let's just say, in a vacuum to compete with that, is probably really unfair, because a modder just creating a mod for enemies, they don't know what kind of classes you're using to fight those enemies. They don't know what kind of strategic changes you have in the game that makes you progress faster or slower, etc. So having that all balanced against each other is a monumental task. And so coming from a environment where a dedicated team of modders is basically doing that the whole time, and also a large community is all playing with exactly the same mod set, providing feedback and discussions about what needs to be changed, what needs to be adjusted, it's just something that's not applicable to any sort of custom collection, where like maybe 2 or 3 people play the same mod list, and so it's then really hard to make any adjustments, any feedback on that ring out. So I was thinking really hard and long about how I want to do this kind of review, and I think it makes most sense to take a look at the individual mods or systems that were in this campaign, and then throw my thoughts to those into the ring. If you don't want to watch the whole, I don't know how long this is going to be, hour of me just ranting, and just want a TLDR, like my short summary would be, as I just said, yeah, generally I enjoyed playing it, but I probably would not play with this or similar mod setup again. It's a, one-time experience of been there, done that, got the t-shirt, thanks, I'll do something else in the future though. And yeah, we'll go into the details here as we look at the individual sessions. If I don't forget to do it, I'll try to add some timestamps to the video description, so you can, if you're only interested on my feedback on Psionics or so, then jump to minute 238 and that will be the Psionics stuff. So without any further ado, let's go to the first part then. Alright, actually before we really start with the first part, there was one more disclaimer I wanted to throw in there. Anything I say in this video is of course just my opinion, and that opinion is only formed on playing one campaign with this mod setup. This does not mean it's a fully fledged out truth or anything like that. It's very, very subjective, and maybe I missed something, maybe something was patched in between or changed or modified. Maybe it's not relevant anymore because after all, I played with the outdated Season 8 mod list, and Season 9 has so many changes, which you see in Christopher Ott's current playthrough series. So, take a heavy grain of salt or two, or maybe a whole bottle of salt when digesting this. Now, we're going to start off the system parts with a look at Amalgamation, which probably had the biggest impact on this campaign. So there's this whole concept with the primary, secondary, tertiary specs, and that we have here, and then based on those specs, also different weapons, etc., etc. There's a lot of RNG that goes into this, like which primary, secondary, tertiary spec you roll, then also which perks actually show up in your talent tree. And by design, the delta of that RNG between worst result and best result, or weakest and strongest result, is so far apart that for me it's definitely not hitting the spot. Like it's so much RNG, and I think I mentioned that in some video where I thought that a lot of the outcomes of missions, and also then the outcomes of my classes and decisions in the class tree, is not so much anymore based on me making good or bad decisions, but just on whether or not I get lucky or unlucky with RNG. And that's not, for me at least, what I enjoy about XCOM. I want to have information, and based on that information make a decision that's either good or bad, and then the game punishes me for bad decision and rewards me for good decisions. You might say, oh, but XCOM is all about RNG, every shot is RNG, but usually like the shot itself is less the RNG part. It's for you to make good decisions, to remove as much RNG as possible from the shot. If you saw the final episode at the end, the final shot percentage for this campaign for me was 96%. So that was the average shot percentage of all the shots I took during the mission, during the campaign. So, positioning, gear, classes, and other selections, bonds, all contribute to getting the highest shot percentage possible, so you don't have to rely on RNG, but rather, take 100% shot, kill that enemy. So, in that regard, I'm not a huge fan of the heavy RNG approach, and that will probably be a big factor in multiple parts of this campaign review kind of thing. So, not only do we have RNG based on the weapon selections, but then also some classes felt way weaker than others. You also have the whole conflicts with the secondary weapons, right? Where if you roll a secondary and tertiary spec that have their own weapons, something like Grenadier and Knight. Knight needs a shield, Grenadier needs a grenade launcher. Congratulations, you have 3 skill trees, 2 of them are conflicting, so one of them you're never gonna use a single perk from. And I find that incredibly uninteresting. Throw in Psionics into the mix, where then your secondary weapon is replaced by the Psi-Amp, and suddenly 2 of your 3 skill trees don't matter anymore. That doesn't feel really good. Then also when it comes to balancing, some very strong skill trees like Sentinel suddenly get amplified. Like if you have Sentinel with a heavy cannon, that's much stronger than a Sentinel tree with a freaking bullpup, right? Because of the pure weapon damage, the range bonuses, crit damage, ammo capacity. Lots of factors that come into that. Then also the aim progression of the class. Again, Sentinel Sharpshooter, where sharpshooters already have high aim, is going to be much more impactful, much more effective than a Sentinel Assault, where the shotgun has the range penalties, and assault soldiers also get less aim stats as they grow up in levels. So yeah, I don't know. There's really a lot to say about this, and but my end thought is that I don't like this kind of approach to class design. That's really what it boils down to. It was interesting at the start, to explore the possibilities, but as soon as I got through it, I was like kind of frustrated. There were often where I said, "Oh, this is the class. Everything here sucks." I'm not picking the most interesting talents or perks per row, but the least terrible ones. And that's not a thing, not a situation I like to be in. Like when making decisions for the classes. On top of that, of course, we have the base game system with the training center, with allowing multiple perks per row, which I just find not interesting. I much prefer the system that base XCOM 2 had, and that's also still present in Long War of the Chosen, where you have 3 rows, and then you have to make a tough choice for the rest of this character's lifespan, pretty much. Do you take A, B, or C? And, once you take one, you can't take the others. And I think that allows for, that kind of restrictive system allows for much more interesting class design, much more meaningful decisions, and also much more balanced classes, honestly. So Amalgamation doesn't do it for me. Let's just put it this way. I can see where the appeal is, why some people really enjoy it, and it's just, for me personally, combining heavy RNG with a huge delta between worst and best results, and then also the inconsequential decisions of vanilla XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. Training center, take all the perks you want, and that's both just not what I really enjoy about the game, and so it's probably one of the main things where I put a big pass on it. Again, it was interesting to play it once, but now that I know how it works and see how it works, I don't see how to make that interesting for me. And since we're talking, or since I mentioned the RNG whole thing, when it comes to like RNG that you as a player don't influence, right? We have the in-game or the in-mission RNG of shooting, etc. That's all something you can influence. Like what kind of classes and what kind of class perks you get is kind of RNG you don't influence. I think when it comes to RNG you don't influence, the difference between the worst and the best result shouldn't be too extreme to make the RNG still interesting. Let me give a quick example of what I'm talking about. We have, for example, experimental ammo, Proving Ground project. There's nothing you can do to influence the RNG. You have 5 different outcomes: AP, Tracer, Dragon, Talon, and Venom Lance. There's probably a best and the worst option, but honestly, no matter what you get, it's still gonna be okay. Also, the cost isn't very high, so it's RNG, but it's okay. It's like at worst you lose a little bit. If you don't have the instant time, you lose a little bit of time, you lose an item core, you try again, eventually you get something useful. Similar, even for the superior PCS that are added by a mod here, sure, the delta between the worst and the best is a little bit higher, between something like a speed PCS or completely useless focus PCS, but it's just 6 different outcomes. There's a huge delta between that. So if we look into the class trees and even with the current setup, 300 different class combinations you can get, there's a huge difference. You can't really repeat it. The game gives you a class setup, and you get it or you don't get it. To a certain extent, you, of course, as we were training new soldiers at the start of the campaign, we had like 3 different choices, I think it was, for each class, but you still didn't see the skill trees. So there's a huge difference also, even with identical skill trees between, let's say, somebody with good sentinel perks, right? Getting cool under pressure, getting ever vigilant, and most importantly also getting rapid reaction. And then in the other end of the spectrum, where you see Sentinel, you click on Sentinel, you're looking forward to it, and then you only get trash perks pretty much, or rather, you don't get key perks like cool under pressure. So you're like, okay, and if I don't have this, then investing into any other perks doesn't really make sense. So even at the point where you make the decision which spec you're going for, you still don't know what you're actually getting. And again, this is just a personal kind of preference where I think the RNG is too heavy, in my opinion, to make it really interesting. And yeah, that's just then something that I didn't enjoy at the end of the day. At start, interesting, planning out the different skill trees, but at the end of the day, I really much prefer fixed class trees, and I also mentioned that to some of the class modders that are often in my streams, where I'm like, I really gained a new appreciation for all the work you do balancing these classes and making these tough decisions between the skill trees. That makes it much more interesting. One other thing, and I'm not sure if this is class related now or where to really put this. One issue with this campaign is right visible here. So this is a save game from pretty much the end of the campaign, and we have 3 people at max rank. it felt a little bit like, you know, you have these late game toys here, the late game skills dangled in front of you for the whole campaign, and then you get to the realization, I'm never gonna get this unless I intentionally extend the campaign super long. I won't be getting that last promotion. At least not with any significant or meaningful amount of soldiers. Like the 3 we had, outliers, right? Gunner, because we had to bring gunners all the time. Let's be honest, like, this is not an amazing skill tree. Like, this actually, her skill tree sucks. Like, freaking mayhem, suppressing fire. Like, how often did we get any value out of mayhem? Yeah, none. Suppressing fire barely used at the end, so it was really just about, yeah, thousands to go. It's kind of good. And we were often throwing in battle scanner. Anything else was just because, hey, it's a gunner and you need shredding. And that's why she saw a lot of missions and probably never got injured. 18 days in the infirmary. So yeah, but the question now is that a problem with Amalgamation adding this 8th rank? Is it a problem with not having any mods that increase the enemy count on the mission, so I would get more kills and more killer XP? But then that conflicts with having something like the Requiem Enemies. They are much stronger, and fighting a bigger number of those might not have been possible with the strength level of these classes. Is it a problem of Covert Infiltration, taking your soldiers out of action for way too long, so you don't go on many missions, you don't get enough XP? Is it a problem of XCOM 2 itself, only giving you XP for kills and not giving you any sort of mission XP? And that's where it comes back down to what I said at the beginning. Having a mod collection of individual mods created in a vacuum, throwing in together, and you don't even know where you would begin to rebalance it, so it doesn't get this frustrating experience of dangling these high-level skills in front of your eyes, but you're never going to reach them. Alright, I'm rambling, so I think it's time to move on to the next system in this campaign. Alright, so let's talk about Psionics Ex Machina and the whole size system here. And there's a lot of things on my mind on this. So it's an interesting concept with having your psi abilities for most of your soldiers based on psi amps and the gems you slot in it. That gives you, I think this is one of the parts where I think you have a lot of interesting decisions to make as a player, with which kind of gems you slot in, what kind of abilities you have, which kind of abilities synergize with the other abilities of the class, since it's, you know, kind of an additional secondary spec of the class. So, you know, you might put different gems on an assault that has psionic abilities than on a sharpshooter that has psionic abilities. So that is definitely a very interesting concept. I kind of really liked it. The willpower cost of abilities, I think it's really well balanced. What I think is not at all well balanced is the siphon will ability, and, you know, leading to some stupid situations like we had where I was just sitting in the evac, siphoning will from the VIP that I was going to rescue because I had 6 more turns on the mission timer and no more enemies on the map, and I was just refilling my willpower to 200%. Also, siphoning will while in concealment. Like, I don't know why siphon will doesn't break concealment. It probably needs to, because this just always felt kind of silly. It also really needs to have its animation removed for something you're going to be spamming the whole time. I just don't want to see that no, or shortened or sped up, or I don't know what. Like, siphoning will kind of weird. Then there was the freaking, what's that ability called? You activate it and everything doesn't consume a cooldown or an action and doesn't cost willpower. I forgot the name of the ability. That I never used because I used it 4 times, and 2 of those times the soldier then failed its roll and panicked. So for me, given that very small sample size, it had a 50% failure rate, and that is makes it completely unusable, right? Because you lost your whole turn. That soldier panicked, and you usually use that ability in the most dire situations where, oh, I need this to not have a cooldown now. You click it, soldier panics. So now you're in an even bigger problem situation. Apparently, I was incredibly unlucky about this. It has a much lower chance of actually triggering the negative effect, but still, I can only go with the experience I had in the game, right? There's no tooltip that actually tells you what it does. So, yeah. I forgot what the ability is named, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. Does it show up in the Psionic rating? No. But anyway, yeah, so that kind of ability system I really don't like. I like, in general, the concept of the Psi PCS, giving additional abilities that way. Now, Psionics felt a little bit weak. Basically, on any soldier that wasn't a full Psionic, where am I? Upgrade equipment. Using any sort of mind control gems was kind of a waste of time, because even if you siphoned will from the enemy to make them weaker, you just never reaching any percentage chance that felt like it's worth taking the action. On the other hand, we had our Psionic soldiers who were just dominating enemies left, right, and center, because they have naturally much higher Psionic strength. I don't think this was healthy for the game, but then again, they shouldn't be here in the first place, so to say. I don't think Psionics Ex Machina is created with full Psionic classes in mind. They're usually disabled. And the only reason we had them is because of the Exalt mod allowing us to capture Psionic soldiers, and only then we had them unlocked. So that was, yeah, it almost felt a little bit like cheating to have them on the mission, but they also made some missions that seemed impossible possible. Now, having all said this, let's come to the part that I really didn't like. And if you saw my rant or heard my rant 10 minutes ago about RNG and different outcomes of things, you probably know what I'm going to talk about. 80 different gems. You randomly get one, and you can get full-on a gem for domination of enemies, you know, full-on mind control for the rest of the mission. Or you can get a gem that puts civilians to sleep so they don't have a detection radius. What in the world? Talking about a delta between the worst and the best outcome on a project that takes a long time and a significant investment of materials? Terrible. This felt really bad. And in that sense, also the same thing for drops from enemies, right? Where you could get a incredibly strong gem early on, or you could get a complete stinker. And with 80 different gems, and pretty much same thing. PCS, maybe not so bad, right? It's just 26 difference. Yeah, you still have some really bad ones, but most of them were interesting enough. So I don't think it was that bad here. Although I have to say, if I got an early trial by fire PCS where you get additional aim for each mission you do, that can really have an impact on your whole campaign. If you get that very early and are able to slot that in on a soldier that stays healthy and goes on a lot of missions, that can snowball really badly, or really goodly for you. Yeah, not a fan of this. Not a fan at all of this. Then we have the melt extraction, which was just a huge waste of time. I don't know what that was all about. Right? I don't actually remember. I know we got a pitiful amount of melts. Now, is this a problem of this mod? Is it a problem of the missions giving me too much melt? I don't know. Then the other thing was we never got the tier 3 Psi-Amp because we never got a Gatekeeper Corps. Who do I blame for that? Is that a Requiem problem? Requiem replacing too many Gatekeepers with other enemies? Is it a... Should the tier 3 Psi-Amp require a Gatekeeper Corps to build? Right, I think that was the main problem. We got the Gatekeeper Autopsy ultimately, but eventually building the Psi-Amp is a... yeah, also requires another shell. But that might also be a vanilla thing, right? I don't even know. I don't even remember if it requires that in vanilla, or if the whole corpse economy is a thing added by the mod. And if the difference is, I think it's just 10 additional Psi offense, then why is there such a high cost involved in this? Right. I think that's all I have for the Psionics mod. There is, again, it's so the main issue is for me, like, the Psi gems. There's too many gems that are utterly useless as opposed to then super strong gems. But I also don't really have a full picture, right? If we go back to the Psi lab, to the gem project, I barely even discovered half of the gems. Then we had a lot of gems that had kinda or Psi abilities that had kinda weird descriptions that weren't really helpful. That probably also comes back to the amalgamation rant of you have so many classes with so many perks, and the perks don't actually tell you what they do. And I'm a sucker for good tooltips, and amalgamation and some of the Psi perks really annoyed me there. Like why would you write a tooltip so obscure that you don't actually know what you're doing? Like me as a player, I don't know what this does now. Like, am I going to bring a weapon or a perk to a fight when I don't actually know how it works? If I'm in a situation where I'm, if it doesn't do what it does, what I want it to do, I can just reload the save and, pick a different one. But I'm always playing, and that's on me again, I'm always playing with the Iron Man mindset of, we're not reloading, we're doing it. Every decision is a final decision. And that doesn't really work well with experimenting, both about enemies and their abilities, and about perks and how they work, equipment and how it works. And if my investment is really high into a gem, into a PCS, into a permanent ability that I cannot change, then I need to have the information, You need to have information to make good, meaningful decisions. Okay, I think enough about this. Let's move on to the next topic. Alright, and the next topic is gonna be Exalt mods, and I'm not sure, like, I wasn't sure what I want to show here, so I'm just gonna show one of the soldiers that we captured from Exalt. Oh boy, Exalt. It's a modification of the Mocx mod, just, renamed to Exalt. Again, it's probably a personal preference thing, but this was very frustrating to deal with, and I don't see the real value being added by having them in the campaign. Now, part of it is also based on the configurations that this campaign was running, mostly having the guaranteed 100% bleed out on all Exalt units. So they would never outright die, they would always bleed out. This is not a default setting in the Exalt mod, this is something that was modified by the campaign modifications. And in some missions it drove me up the wall, because it doesn't have proper interaction with all the character abilities that rely on getting a kill this turn. Be it something like Implacable, getting a movement action after a kill. Thousands to Go, getting another shot after a kill. Untouchable. And even things like giving you combat rush when you kill an enemy, where you then give combat rush to other soldiers in your squad. All of that didn't work. Death from above, you name it. There's so many abilities that are based on kill interactions, and those not working on bleed out, and then in combination with these enemies having 100% bleed out, was very frustrating. Now, the easy solution would be, hey, all of this bleed out should just count as a kill. That would fix most of my complaints for the last minute here. But it doesn't. Right? It doesn't work that way, and frustration guaranteed. Then, on top of that, there's the whole issue with Exalt being active, like not as an activated enemy halfway across the map. There's a lot of issues with that, especially since they also have squad-side snipers, right? That can shoot you, and you don't know where you have to move to avoid line of sight, because the interface doesn't support that kind of information. You had all the interactions with Lost, with Rebels on retaliation missions, where we had some missions where Exalt were just murdering the Rebels with 6 active Exalt soldiers, just each of them killing a rebel on the other side of the map. And even if I didn't have normal enemies to fight with, it would take me 3 turns to get to them and engage them. And that just breaks the normal mission gameplay. I mean, some people like to rant about the pod system of XCOM 2. I think it's a fantastic system that's really great for the pacing of missions and having the player be able to do something while not being unfairly punished by having enemies active somewhere else that they can't do anything about. Again, especially retaliations, protect the device missions, which I didn't even take, I didn't even bother with any protect the device missions this campaign, because these missions are just poor. Even without Exalt. If I had Exalt in the mix, that's even worse. You suddenly have 6 people shooting a device, and it takes you 5 turns to get there. Yeah. Like, if I would just want to lose the mission, I might as well load into the mission and evac out immediately. And hear Bradford talking about how poorly I performed. On top of that, I don't like the game lying to me. If Exalt comes in with a reinforcement flare, I set up overwatches, blade storms, whatever, on that reinforcement flare, and then they actually drop in somewhere else. That's, to me, absolute no-no. That's, like, for me, and don't get me wrong, like, it's not like, oh, I want the game to be easy to ambush them. Like, my main play mode is Long War. Long War doesn't have reinforcement flares. Reinforcement just drop in wherever, deal with it. I'm used to that. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not having information. I'm not okay with the game lying to me, intentionally misleading me that way. If you drop a reinforcement flare, you better drop the reinforcements exactly on that flare. And just, you know, having then the explanation of, yeah, but they're programmed to drop outside of your vision. It's like, yeah, then don't show a flare. Then I'm not gonna complain. If you don't show a flare and just say, oh, Exalt are gonna come in, better get ready, that's fine. But, you know, if you use the reinforcement flare vision system that's in the game, then stick to the rules. Don't just cheat your way out of it. Yeah, that was part 2. And yeah, I don't know. Part 3 is probably then about the thing that we got soldiers that were way stronger. We got soldiers that were ranked way higher than anything that we had. Like, I'm fairly certain when we captured Ward Square, he was the highest ranking soldier, right? I don't think we had another colonel at that point, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, he was, of course, since we captured them, deadly, very injured, right? Gravely wounded for 30 days. He felt a little bit behind. And then also, despite this not being an amalgamation class, but I'm not even sure if this is somehow influenced by amalgamation or if this is just influenced by the Exalt mod. Long story long, it kind of sucked the skill tree, so the impact of having a colonel level soldier at the start of the campaign, the stage of the campaign, wasn't as big. But, you know, if we had captured something useful, that would have been pretty nuts. Could have gotten another Templar. I screwed that one up, dismissing our second Templar. We did get ourselves... Was that a capture? Was Beast a capture from Exalt? Or did we get Beast from just getting another skirmisher in a normal way? I don't even remember. So yeah, that's pretty much all I can think of for Exalt for me. It's I guess the added factor is a lot of the positive ideas for Exalt is people like being nostalgic about Enemy Within, but I also thought in Enemy Within that Exalt thematically was just bad, a bad addition to the game. So that doesn't really help the whole fact that, you know, in my opinion, bad idea is being resurrected here. Alright, moving on. Alright, let's move on to the enemies, and I think the most dominant enemy mod here was the Requiem mod. Now we had the Advent Hunter, which I yeeted after that covert action with that absurd Hunter anything unit. So that was removed. Praetorians, Ethereals, I mean, I think they're all also made by Reshi, but they're not technically part of Requiem. I'm not sure I want to even talk about those separately. There's not much I have to say about those. So, but Requiem is kind of a special case. So let's talk about those a little bit. And my first thought is that I really like Requiem, the idea behind Requiem. First of all, the reaction mechanic, I think, is really interesting. It's, you know, throws a new spanner in the works, gives you something to think about, something to account for. It breaks the standard XCOM play loop, action loop a little bit. You have to kind of account for that. And I found that, for the most part, an interesting challenge. And ways around it. Now, of course, there was the frustration with them triggering a reaction if I activated them from stealth by shooting at them, which, as I understand, is still not intended, but it was consistently happening, so that was adding a little bit to my frustration with a few things, but in general, that's something I can probably overlook. On top of that, I was ranting on the Psi side and on the class side about bad tooltips and bad perk description, etc. Like, Requiem units, you press F1 and it's just a pleasure to read through the perks. Like, all the tooltips are very well explained. Like, that Reshi's not afraid of making longer descriptions for the perks to really tell you what's going on. It's just looking fantastic. It's, you know, hats off. Like, that is just a dedication to giving the player information so they know what they deal with. Let's actually look at something like the Titan has some really more complex, longer abilities, right? Titanic Fortitude. Like, that's a long tooltip, but it gives you all the information you need to deal with it. So, like, I don't know what to say. It's amazing. It's really well done. Big thanks, right? On top of that, also, I have to say, just on a personal level, whenever I was talking to Reshi, be it in Discord or when she was on live streams, or when I was playing like some longer campaigns with Requiem Enemies, so it was super nice to talk to, very receptive to feedback, very patient with me maybe not understanding mechanics and explaining stuff, and just a great person to be around. So it's, you know, Requiem has a special place in my heart. That being said, there are a few enemies that kind of frustrate me with their abilities. We had the whole navigator line of enemies that can see anyone, and from my experience in this campaign, pretty much almost always auto damaged the units. I know now there's a roll, there's an attack roll that they can potentially fail, and I've seen it fail once, but that doesn't really make me feel much better about this. So those are kind of. I didn't like the navigators. I don't like the gunships. I was going to say the gunship debuff they apply with the new future, but there's also the fact that they can daze enemies, and oh god, I hate daze mechanics. Then there's the whole thing with the gunship, weird AoE and whatever immunities. There's a whole lot of things to say about the gunship as an enemy type. So there's like individual enemies that I don't really like, or I think they're kind of a little bit overtuned. We're looking at the Titan right now, and while I generally really like it, the fact that in theory, if this enemy gets to attack you, he could wipe out your whole squad, right? Endless Aid. Every successful hit with your has a chance to refund all spent action points. If he gets to attack and he RNGs Endless Aid into Endless Aid into Endless Aid, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that could wipe your squad, right? RNG wise, if he, you know, chance to refund all spent action points, just keeps attacking. So I think, like, on the I like the resilience of the enemies, you know, with some of these enemies having mechanics where you can't one-shot them in a single turn, but at the same time, I feel like on the offensive sides, they were overtuned, or they are overtuned. Like, I don't need an enemy that can crit for like 19 damage and one-shots every single soldier I have. Like, no matter what armor they're wearing, what stuff they're having, that's just not an HP pool I can provide. And I understand the resilience kind of part of the enemies, where we want to get out of this Alpha Strike meta, but if you then introduce enemies that, hey, if they get an action, one of your soldiers dies, then we're back to I need to deal with them in one turn, I need to Alpha Strike them. And I think that's kind of... it's a little bit too much, you know, not much. It's a little bit of a numbers game, right? It's not completely broken, completely bonkers, but very bonkers. There's also the whole thing with yeah, this enemy is immune against everything unless you brought a frost bomb. Frost bomb solves all your problems. And there were a lot of enemies in base XCOM 2 that were designed around this. It's like, this enemy will screw up your whole squad unless you brought a frost bomb, and at that's like really a mechanic I don't like. Like, I prefer playing a campaign where I never bring a frost bomb to a mission because it's such a broken item, in my opinion. So having enemies kind of designed around, oh, you can counter them with frost bomb, really makes me roll my eyes. Again, personal opinion thingamabob here. What else? I think that's all being said, and we're coming a little bit back to what I started at the beginning about mods being developed in a vacuum, right? So if Requiem Enemies felt a little bit very heavy on the armor side, that's really just because the classes we were using this campaign didn't really have enough reliable ways to get shredding into the missions, so armor was a much more oppressive thing than in other campaigns. I don't like what the Requiem was doing to the corpse economy, right? Gatekeeper Corps being the best example of things we never got. It also took us a very long time to get Archon corpses, Andromedon, etc., etc. Then maybe one last minor annoyance I have with this is if we look, let's go here. Like there's what, four different Andromelids? I couldn't tell you. No, 3 different Andromelids. Oh, even I don't know what's the difference between them. I know that we had a retaliation where the first time we saw an Andromelid, we saw all 3 versions of it. Like normally you would think M1, M2, M3 is like different strength levels, but they're just doing slightly different things. And it's even worse, I think, when it comes to the snakes, where you have like what, 9 different Taipan variants. At that point I'm losing my ability to kind of recognize and then immediately identify like which enemy does what, and having to F1 each enemy each and every time just because there's so many different variants that do slightly different things and they don't necessarily are distinguishable enough, easily enough identifiable. That kind of bugs me then a little bit. So it's a minor complaint, and that might just be me also being, you know, bad memory commander who forgets stuff. But I think in terms of clarity, like variety is good, but variety stakes, I don't know, feels a little bit too much. Like, do we need 9 different variants? Do the 3 different Andromelids really do that much different that we have these 3 different versions? I don't know, I still couldn't tell you. But I think one of them does mark enemies and one of them has soul fire. I don't even know. One of them has energy shields, but all of them have the fog. Yeah, this one has mark target. Yeah, can we find it out? Is it relevant right now? No. But maybe one last thing. I think that's the same one again. So one last thing for Requiem, this thing. There are these group buffs, and I think I talked about this in an episode already. This is like the one Requiem mechanic I just really dislike, because it's just, it scales with the size of the group the Requiem units shows up in, right? Deal +1 damage per living squad member. If this thing shows up in a group of 8, +8, like the scaling is out of the world. The amount of damage this can do to you, based on the RNG in which kind of pot it shows up. It seems insane, and also it's kind of then I don't know. It's in not a linear progression in terms of difficulty, right? You as a player already have a more difficult time dealing with a large group, and now the larger the group is, it also has a stronger buff. And I mean, this is just an offensive buff. Some of these had like defensive abilities that you had to deal with that scale based on group size, and suddenly makes these pots really, really tough. I'm not a fan of this ability, and that's again personal preference. I think that there's enough here already to make the enemies interesting enough that the pot-wide buffs seem unnecessary and yeah, just on top of everything else. But yeah, anyway, this is like honestly, of all the things in this campaign, I'm looking forward to playing more with Requiem in the future again. Like, this is the one of the mods that I'm definitely gonna have again in some future campaigns, and I can't say that about most of the other mods in here. All right, moving on. All right, I think that brings us to talking about Covert Infiltration itself as the main mod, the framework that everything is revolving around here for the strategy layer, right? And I think one of the most obvious parts that when I was thinking about this is the mod is called Covert Infiltration, and I'm thinking about this campaign, which had like, what, around 130 missions in it, and how many missions were actually the result of a covert infiltration, where we infiltrated a squad for a certain amount of time, then we could choose to over-infiltrate or not. You know, the covert infiltration has this amazing infiltration system. It takes then a little bit longer, and you get the bonuses, or you remove sit traps if you over-infiltrate. You have this really fancy UI there for that, which is really well made. And I think we had like 5 actual covert infiltrations. And I think that was probably one of the weaknesses of this campaign, that everything revolved around dark events, countering dark events, and these dark event missions always being assault, so instant launch missions. And it kind of shortchanged, I think, the strengths of CI and put a finger into the wounds of the weaknesses, and it hurt. I like having dark events as the main motivator for 90% of my missions in the campaign. Didn't really work for me. Like, I didn't find that interesting, because also there's so much RNG about it, right? You're just sitting there, you know, okay, new month ticks over, 6 new dark events. Which one are those? Okay, let's wait for those missions to spawn and counter them. It's it also moves a lot of the decision making to one single point in each month. Like, you don't really make any good decisions or any interesting decisions all through the month. Month takes over, bam, bunch of new covert actions. Which ones will I do this month? Which ones will I ignore? Check the activity chains. Which dark events am I getting? Which am I not getting? Or check the dark events. Make the decision, okay, I want to counter A, B, C, and D, E, and F. I'm going to just run through. And you're done making decisions for the month. Now it's just sitting back passively and reacting. Then the large amount of dark events and the strength of some of the dark event also kind of forced your hand into, you have to counter them. So any missions that was actually a covert infiltration, you know, was just a matter of, I don't care about the mission. I can't afford to counter it because of my limited barrack size and of the willpower mechanics taken my soldiers out of combat for so long, I just couldn't afford to run covert infiltrations. Let alone the equipment requirements of you're sending out half your gear with a squad for an infiltration and then not having it available for the 8 or so assault missions that would spawn that you have to do to counter all the dark events. So that whole dynamic with dark events and covert infiltrations like taking a big backseat, I didn't like. I really didn't like that. Now, on top of that, let me gather my thoughts here. On top of that, we had the way the willpower system worked, is kind of rough, in my opinion. It's kind of doubling down on multiple factors, right? So you have let me go back a little bit. Let's go back to XCOM Enemy Unknown Enemy Within. Right, most people were playing this with like 6, maybe 12 soldiers. You had an A team that you bring on every single mission, and they were the strongest ones, and you better not lose anyone. Longbow 1 came around and said, hey, we don't want you to just use your A team. We want you to have a bigger roster and rotate through the soldiers. So after each mission, soldiers would get tired, exhausted. I'm not sure how long we'll call it again. And they would have to recover a certain amount of time. And then they would be available again for a mission. It's like, cool. It's a cool system. It really worked reasonably well. And you would rotate for your roster. XCOM 2 came. A-team situation is back. Everybody brings the same soldier on every mission. Longbow 2 comes around and says, okay, we want to again have a bigger roster, force players to rotate for soldiers, but we don't want to do the willpower system again. So they implemented the infiltration system, where you commit your soldiers on an infiltration well, you're not committing. You're sending it on an infiltration of a mission, so they're not available for 5, 6, 7 days, and if another mission pops, you have to send somebody else. You still have the flexibility of recalling any infiltration, so you still have a lot of player agency of being able to make decisions based on the situation at hand. War of the Chosen comes around and brings in the willpower system, where your soldiers lose willpower and they get tired or shaken if you send them on too many missions. Basically, kind of mimicking a little bit what Longbow 1 was doing, forcing you to have more than just an A-team of soldiers to bring there. And then... now, I'm not sure about the exact timing of things here. Yeah, I need to grab a drink of water. 1 second. So, then at some point, we have Longbow of the Chosen being developed, and during the testing and development process, people see like the conflict between, hey, we have this willpower system making people tired and taking them out of combat for a long time. And at the same time, we also have our infiltration system, where people are infiltrating missions and not available. And during the testing process, it was quickly discovered like having both systems on top of each other doesn't really work. Like, takes the soldiers out of the combat too long. The whole willpower tiredness system was a little bit too under the hood and obfuscated. So at the end of the day, while it wasn't completely removed, it was is not a major factor anymore. Covert Infiltration keeps both systems, right? You have the infiltration and you have the pretty much vanilla, I want to say, willpower tiredness shaken system. And that brings me back to the XP levels of my soldiers. My soldiers were out of fight so long that it makes me feel like it doesn't work. There's too much taken soldiers out of the fight here happening. And my big example I'm thinking of here is also, it wasn't even a mission, right? We did a covert action, I think it was the Hunt the Chosen, the previous step, where somebody did a covert action for, yeah, it says 24 days here, but it ended up being like 26 days, because obviously putting soldiers in there extends the timer for some inexplicable reason. And then the soldiers coming back from the covert action were then tired for 50 days. And that was really, for me, the point where I was like, the system lost me, right? As having any sort of understanding for it. Why does this have to be here? Why, like, in a game where the main focus is having my soldiers on missions and, you know, playing tactical missions, that is for me the bread and butter of XCOM, having some sort of strategy part that takes a soldier out of this bread and butter part for 2 in-game months, there's just no understanding, I want to say, on my part, how that makes it interesting. So for me, I think, like, if we're committing to this, if we're having covert actions, and also covert actions that take much longer than vanilla covert actions, right? At least as far as I remember, like, covert actions should not incur a willpower penalty. That is just my opinion on this whole thing. Like, there's no reason to have this big of penalty, or you need to do something about the barracks size. But still, then it just spreads out your soldiers and your XP even more. Like, this was really like the combination of being out of the action during the covert action, and then also being tired afterwards and being out of action for another 10 days or so. It just felt frustrating. I never get to play with my soldiers. My soldiers that have a skill tree where I select abilities to make them stronger on missions, I never get to bring them on missions. I don't know. That kind of misses the point for me. Am I gonna rant about extreme, major, minor chances of ambush and risks, and why those are not just percentages, and you actually see, you know, when you set up the covert action, what equipment items actually do to those risks? No, I think I've complained about this during the campaign enough that it's going to be not a surprise to anyone that I think this is not a nicely designed system, and that the clarity for the player is just not there, and it's kind of obfuscating things. And yes, there's I think I've talked with some people during the campaign, and they said, yeah, but that's just, vanilla also doesn't show that. And it's like, yeah, but if vanilla does something poorly, why do we have to take it over? Like, that's a design decision to not change it. And so I don't think the argument, yeah, but that's just vanilla, counts if you're doing an overhaul mod of that kind of scope. Then that's not, that doesn't count for me. Anyway, the other problem was that, especially towards the end of the campaign, none of this mattered, right? There was, like, the last 2-3 months, we weren't doing any covert actions because nothing here was worth the reward or was worth the risk. That felt kind of a little bit meh. Yeah, I don't know. And again, like, the whole taking soldiers out of the fight, 24 days for Hunt the Chosen. And I'm not sure if that is a vanilla duration, or this is a CI, or maybe it's even the Season 8 campaign settings that extended for some reason. It felt like a super long commitment for a soldier for basically no payoff, because in that time, if I have a soldier back at base, I can probably run 2, maybe 3 missions with them and recover their willpower fully, or I can send them on covert action and they get 2 XP and a handshake for the reward. It just doesn't add up, really. So that's, for me, makes me not want to interact with the system, and I don't think that's a good sign of a well working system. Or maybe it's just not a good sign of my choices as a player. I don't know, man. So yeah, it's really probably then just a, yeah, not for me. Doesn't work for me. I know there was a lot of negativity here. Like, again, go back to the start of the video. Overall, I enjoyed the campaign. I had my fun for the most part, but I also don't think I want to play with this sort of setup again. Alright, I think I touched on all the unique systems we had in this campaign. And yeah, I'm gonna be playing more XCOM. There's a lot of more campaigns to come, and looking forward whatever mods come out there in the future or are changed or anything like that. And yeah, I'll be here making content, or I'll be on Twitch making content also. So stop by there, stop on the Discord, leave a comment, all that usual stuff. Thanks for all the support, all the comments during this campaign. And I know there's like there was a lot of criticism, negativity at the end here, but I hope I made my points clear where this is coming from. Thanks for watching. See you next time.